Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. My name is Drew Marshall. I'm an independent consultant and I'm providing support to the Network of Leadership Scholars Professional Development Workshop this year in beautiful Orlando, steamy Orlando. And I've been working with the Network of Leadership Scholars for, this is, I think, the third year we've been collaborating on design thinking for scholars as a framework for engagement. And today's webinar is essentially to provide an overview of design thinking for scholars to interested parties, those people who are interested in design thinking as a practice, for scholars who are new to design thinking as a practice or a concept, and for those people who are going to be attending the PDW in Orlando in a few short weeks, actually, coming up very soon. It's been an absolute pleasure for my part to be working with the design committee from the Network of Leadership Scholars. My connection is through Naga Sivasubramaniam, and Naga is on the line today, so I'm very happy for that fact. But there's been a great team of collaborators that have been working. If you missed our last webinar, we had an overview of the topic that we were going to be focusing on, which is dealing with homelessness. Specifically, we're targeting homelessness in and around the Orlando area, and the leadership required to address such a pervasive and systemic problem, or what would be called in design thinking terms a wicked problem, or if you're from Boston, I guess, a wicked problem. So for my part, I'm very excited in the kind of work that takes my practice into social innovation, and this is something that the Network of Leadership Scholars has been doing year on year. So it's in terms of my involvement, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with this particular group. If you're interested in more about me, you can check out my website. The details will be at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded. I'm hoping that the presentation portion of the webinar will be approximately 30 minutes, and we'll leave time for questions at the end. As I noted a little before the hour, the questions can be asked via the question function. If you look on the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen, you'll see a word that says questions in white on a blue background. Beside that is an arrowhead. If you click on the arrowhead, that opens up the question dialog box. That's if you'd like to ask questions in advance. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll open up the floor to questions, and the way you can ask a question is you can actually raise your hand. There's a functionality in the attendee list that enables you to put your hand up, and what I can do is I can call on you directly and then unmute your specific line so that you can ask your question, which I think would be probably the best way to solicit questions, but I also recognize that sometimes you'll have a question and you want to capture that, so feel free to use the question chat function down below. I will get started now. Let's talk about design thinking for scholars. For those of you who've seen this presentation in an earlier incarnation last year, we did record that. Many of the visuals will remain the same. The model itself has not been changed in terms of the actual outline that you see on screen in front of you, the 5 different phases, which include discovery, interpretation, ideation, experimentation, and evolution. I think what we discovered last year as a group was that the practice of design thinking in the room on the day, while being very energizing, we're unable to get all the way through all 5 steps. And that's actually not an intention. But I think there were some people who came to the day fully expecting that they would start at the start in terms of defining the challenge, and then at the end of the process would be well and truly through experimentation and into codifying their learnings. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're expecting to accomplish on the day as regards each particular phase, but I think the value is in creating a crucible in which we can collaborate together, which is what design thinking is all about. So let's start at the start in terms of design thinking, and let's see what we can do to give you a bit of an overview. So here are the foundations of design thinking. For many different reasons, I wanted to start with these foundations because I think so much of the popular media in terms of presenting ideas or notions of design thinking seems to confuse the issue. I think for my part, when I'm working with clients, the thing I try and get them to understand is that it's a mental model. It's an approach that you can take which is very much human-centric. The idea being that you want to have a specific stakeholder set or customer set or research target in mind before you begin the process of design thinking, because you'll frame an initial design challenge around that particular target audience. Design thinking as a practice brings together the components of design as an aesthetic practice, designed objects, designed images, artifacts, and applies that to much more comprehensive, process-driven and systems-driven ways of looking at problems. So let's talk a little bit about where design thinking comes from. The way many people know design thinking is through a design firm based in Palo Alto, California called IDEO. IDEO is actually the amalgamation of 3 different firms in California. They have a global presence, and they've been working on the boundaries of design and design practice probably for close to 40 years now. As a single entity, they've been around since the mid-1980s, but they really came into their own in the late 1990s into the early 2000s in terms of being synonymously known with design thinking. And the reason for that is they actually spent a lot of time, energy, and effort focusing on what design thinking was, actually codifying the different elements of design thinking. For example, they provided this particular model of design thinking, which incorporates 3 different approaches to solutioning, horrible word, sorry. I'll try and neglect my jargon self as we go forward. When they were approaching clients, what they recognized that many of the clients were focused primarily in 2 of the areas in this particular diagram, the business aspect and the technology aspect. Many of their clients, and these were not just clients in what would be called the corporate sector. They also have done significant work in social innovation in the not-for-profit sector. But they also recognized that even in those areas, viability and feasibility were the dominant players in terms of what solution design was driven by. And based on their work in and around aesthetic design, they said that there had to be a way that we could put desirability in the mix in terms of solution design. If you did not start with the people who are involved, for whom you are creating a solution, more often than not, you were creating products or services in search of markets or customers. So from a design thinking perspective, the place you start is with the people, with desirability. And we'll talk more about the implications of that as we move through the design thinking for scholars model. The other notion, I think, behind design thinking is that design thinkers have been not necessarily slandered or mislabeled, but I do think people have applied shorthand thinking to the practice of design thinking and have actually tied them, perhaps because of their personal experience, inappropriately to particular types of practices. The use of Venn diagrams, the use of 2x2s, the use of Maslow's hierarchy of needs as dominant models for practice from a design thinking perspective have ended up creating a tension with the application of design thinking. So before we go much further, I want to say that the design thinking for scholars model that we employ with the network of leadership scholars is something that is using the offerings that are in the public domain in terms of open IDEO, the not-for-profit work that IDEO has done, and significant other design thinking resources, many of which are as old as the late 1970s, early 1980s in terms of practice. So we won't be, we do not get hung up on particular tool sets or particular models that might or might not be employed within design thinking as a practice. So we try and avoid that overall. What we don't avoid, though, is the journey of design thinking, the idea that it is founded in research. That research is based on the framing of the design challenge for in and around a particular stakeholder group or customer set. That research enables us to, over time, identify significant patterns that will result from the qualitative analysis that we conduct based on our observational studies, usually anthropological or ethnographic. Based on those patterns, we begin to form insights. These insights are authentic and revealing and essentially non-obvious. We would not have identified these insights unless we'd done the hard work of the observational studies. And from that, we can move from insight into conceptualizing a potential solution, and then the process of delivering a solution is through prototyping, rapid prototyping and experimentation. And experimentation in this particular context is all about achieving a clarity around the viability, feasibility, and desirability of our solution as it pertains to the intended audience, the stakeholder, research target, etc. The idea being that the final design solution that we come up with is specifically appropriate and innovative for that particular group's needs. So the first place we start is with the area of discovery. The model that you see here has 3 different components in there: defining the challenge, laying the groundwork, and gathering inspiration. The practice of using this particular model during the PDW this year is going to rest on the work of some significant players in terms of people who are academicians and people who are connected to the topic of homelessness in the field. Ron Piccolo has a team of students who are providing support in terms of data gathering and on-the-ground research for the PDW, which we will be reviewing together on-site, and I'll talk more about that when we get into interpretation. The other thing that I would recommend is, if you personally have access to data or research or first-person experience in and around the subject of homelessness in your community, it's absolutely appropriate to bring that to share during the event. And in fact, the expectation is that you do come prepared with some of that particular source material. So. The elements of discovery I want to dig into in a little more detail. First and foremost, you need to figure out where you're going. So defining the challenge and identifying specific members of a team. Design thinking is a collaborative process. One of the great things about the way it's been employed in terms of the Design Thinking for Scholars model with the network of leadership scholars is that, in and of its essence, by bringing people together around a particular subject, we have a clear goal and a clear intention in terms of action. The other aspect is that because we've got such a significant lead time, it gives us a significant amount of time to lay the foundation, lay a groundwork for the work we're doing. And to paraphrase Churchill, the value of the plan is in the planning. When it comes to execution, the plan will likely go out the window or be severely changed, regardless of your expectation. But to plan and have an intention is a significant component of design thinking overall. Which doesn't mean we don't conduct thorough planning. We've done our level best to identify significant targets that we need to meet in terms of preparing for the PDW to make sure it is a rich experience. This is the first time that the network of leadership scholars has positioned its one-day gathering in and around the Academy of Management's annual meeting as a PDW, and we've taken that very seriously, and we want to make sure that the work that we do on the day is reflected in the enriching experience that we're going to provide. So we're doing our level best around that. This webinar is one of those components. The other thing that we do in terms of discovery is, as I've mentioned, we identify a particular target, and what we're looking for are the network of relationships between the target audience or the intended research subject and the connections that they have to a greater network of influences and systems and processes that impact them. Based on targeting this particular group, we can gather a much more rounded, a much deeper understanding of the presenting need. From a design challenge perspective, the presenting need is usually always reflected in the end solution that we arrive at. However, the journey that gets us there may at times mean that the design challenge will shift and will change over time. But at its essence, the solution we come to at the end is something that will focus on the specific needs of the stakeholders that we're identifying. The other approach that we take is, and this is an approach that is fundamental to design thinking in terms of observational studies, is recognizing the extremes of the stakeholders that are in the mix. When we talk about leadership in terms of homelessness in particular, what we will be exploring are the different qualities of leaders. There are leaders who are inherent to solution finding in and around this particular subject matter. There are community leaders, there are political leaders, there are not-for-profit leaders, even business leaders who are actively involved. But at the other end of the extreme, there are people who probably do not consider themselves leaders, yet who strike leadership positions, who have significant influence as leaders, regardless of the label that they apply to each other. And it's understanding those extremes in the discovery process that helps us bring into sharp contrast items that are unique to each of those groups, but also where there are areas of commonality. And it's the areas of commonality that usually pique the most interest for participants. Of course, last but by no means least, when we're gathering inspirations as far as the discovery process is concerned, we're going to first sources. We're immersing ourselves in content. We're using available resources online, previous research that's been done in the area. We're seeking out subject matter expertise from individuals and from groups. We're going to practitioners who are in the field working on this subject matter every day. Regardless of the topic that we choose, that immersive experience is an essential component of discovery in design thinking for scholars. The next section we're exploring is interpretation. So as we build on the work that Ron Piccolo and his team have done, and that Barbara Cosby has highlighted in the webinar previously, what we're going to focus on in terms of the next opportunities in terms of interpretation are, how do we take all of these rich sources of data and transform those rich sources of data into learnings that we can share as a group? I think the challenge for us overall is making sure that we honor the people who are in the room, but we also honor the people who are unable to be in the room in terms of sharing stories and sharing inspiring stories. The idea being that this process is generative, that we're adding to the quality of our understanding and the depth of our understanding over time, which leads us to a search for meaning, so that we question our understanding of the topic and each other's understanding of the topic in not necessarily in a confrontational way, but certainly not in a way that is passive. Where there are areas of disconnect or areas of discord, we will confront those. The dynamic process of designing is essentially about surfacing conflict and dealing with that head on. Last but by no means least, we focus on framing opportunities. So what are the opportunities that we see as related to the data based on the insights that we've developed over time? You'll see that the term here, news you can use in terms of insight. What we're looking for are things that are not obvious, things that make us as participants sit up and take notice, things that surprise us about the data that we've explored. And when we translate those insights into opportunities, we frame them as questions because they become the basis of the brainstorming work that we will be doing in the room on the day. Now, how we get to this particular level of interpretation is I think, a journey in and of itself. The interpretation phase and the ideation phase are the key components of the PDW day overall. It's a very full day, it's a very rich day, and it leads from the evening panel discussion into the full day PDW. So the dinner with the panel discussion starts out by helping us understand what we're dealing with, what are the key learnings, what's the shared understanding of the subject matter at hand. Based on that, we can enter into deeper dialogue so that we understand the patterns that we're seeing, so that we can explore the themes that are making themselves evident through dialogue and through discussion. The key component from my experience of design thinking as a practice is more often than not, when we explore solution design, there is a high tendency for individuals involved to primarily coalesce around their area of subject matter expertise, either to speak forcefully and singularly from that area of subject matter expertise. What we're looking for, though, is people sharing from their experience and engaging with the experience of others. Linus Pauling, the two-time Nobel laureate, said, in order to get a good idea, you actually have to have lots of ideas. And one of the ways Pauling did that was actually exploring the interstices between his practice, he was a chemist, and the practice of others whose subject matter areas he was interested in. And what he was trying to find were the boundaries that overlapped. He would quite literally identify Venn diagrams between areas of subject matter expertise, and that's where he would like to explore to push the envelope. What we're trying to do is create a crucible on the day to enable us as experts in our own right. Everybody comes with a degree of expertise to the room, but letting go of that expertise enough to be able to listen to and explore and recognize others' experiences in our own and our own in others. The last area that we finish up, though, is with the idea of framing that opportunity. The opportunity that becomes the target for us on the day may or may not be surprising to some of you. I know last year's opportunity was surprising to me, if I remember it correctly. But I think one of the challenges for us as we move forward is determining as a group whether we focus on a single opportunity and all of the subgroups in the room brainstorm that, or if we focus on separate opportunities. And we can go either way. From a learning experience, it would be a rich exploration regardless of the approach that we take. And the idea being is that we want to set ourselves up to explore and learn, but also to fail. The idea being that through failure comes a deeper level of learning. We're not designing for failure. What we're designing to do is be generative in terms of our thinking. But the only way we can do that is if we give ourselves permission to fail in the room on the day. It won't be perfect. It never is. And design thinking as a practice is never perfect. What we're hoping for is a most adequate solution at the end of the process overall. The key concept I'll leave you with at the end of interpretation is the idea of the how might we question. The how might we question frames our opportunity by the three-word lead-in. How, it's open to possibilities. Might, it's inquiry-driven. And we, it's collaborative in nature, all at the heart of design thinking as a practice. The next area we explore is ideation. Ideation is not going to be unfamiliar to you all. This is where we're focused on brainstorming of ideas, reflecting on the brainstorming, and identifying where our priorities are in terms of what we might pursue from a research perspective. What we're hoping to drive to, and what we tried to drive to last year, were opportunities for research either in and around the subject matter that's being presented, or that strike a chord with the researchers in the room, the academics in the room on the day, so that they can carry the work out back to their own workplaces, their own institutions. So let's just touch on ideation and what ideation means to us. We're trying to capture all of these elements in the room on the day. We're providing a stimulating environment. We're hopefully providing the incentive that it is a PDW for participation. We're looking at tapping into the creativity, the motivation, and the inspiration of people in the room on the day. And for my purposes, it's not necessarily a process of identifying the one good idea. So many of the practices that I've seen, or misapplied approaches to design thinking, focus on the one appropriate or one single solution. That's not what this process is about. This process is about exploring the subject matter fully, identifying one or more opportunities that we can pursue, and the brainstorming that we do will reveal many, many, many research opportunities. And depending on who is in the room and what moves them, those opportunities will be carried forward. The other thing that I also notice around brainstorming, and this is something that I think is a fallacy, one of the challenges for brainstorming that I see unrelated to design thinking as a practice, is that brainstormings are not framed appropriately. They're not time boxed. They're not given a set of criteria and behavioral practices that are useful for driving that brainstorming. As a result, the brainstorming can tend to dissipate after a period of time, and the value of the ideas may be quite limited, and actually the ideas themselves may suffer from small means, meaning that the ideas are small, they're not necessarily envelope pushing or consequential. What we're trying to accomplish through design thinking as an approach is breakthroughs. What we're looking for are identifying research topics that could produce breakthroughs in and around the subject matter of homelessness. So if you're not a happy brainstormer, please come with us and try brainstorming as it's going to be applied on the day. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, because the quality of the ideas that come out of the brainstorming approach are, well, first and foremost, there's many multiples of ideas. My experience working with the network of leadership scholars is when you put a bunch of smart people in the room, you give them a clear question that they need to coalesce around, the output can be quite extraordinary. And I think that's this part of the program is one that really really drives that home for me. The energy and the enthusiasm in the room on the day is pretty remarkable. So through the brainstorming, we arrive at potential research topics. We can create idea clusters around those. We use post-it notes extensively. The post-it notes can capture key pieces of data that we've observed, observations, passing remarks, subjects, quotes, but the idea being they need to be a direct response to their framed opportunity, the how might we question that we're asking and answering in the room on the day. The only other thing I would say about ideation is too much of ideation is focused on generation of ideas, which then get parked. My hope is that we can make commitments in the room to carry forward ideas on the day. I think that was the one thing that I don't think I put enough framework around that at the session that we ran last year, which was not a PDW session. My hope is that this year that we can actually have some clear and tangible opportunities that we can take out of the room, clear ideas from a research perspective, and clear commitments to engage with those outside the room. The fourth of the steps is actually where we move from being in the room during the PDW to actually helping the academics, the researchers, the people in the room on the day carry forward the research. One of the things that is provided to all participants at the PDW is a handbook of the Design Thinking for Scholars approach. We're in version 2 of that. The handbook is provided in hard copy. If you would prefer a soft copy, please feel free to email me at the end of this webinar, and I can identify a way to get that to you. It's a pretty sizable document, but it's able to be printed out pretty effectively, or I can send you a link so that you can print it out on demand from the Mag Cloud website, which is what we use to produce these handbooks. Experimentation, 2 keys here: making a prototype. Now, prototyping from a research perspective is a bit of a stretch, so what we've tried to do is actually frame that in a number of different ways in terms of theory development, or crafting an initial framework, or research design, or an intervention approach, so that we've kind of covered the field in terms of practitioner behaviors, researcher behaviors, and other interested parties. The other thing that I want to highlight here is the concept of sharing and testing in terms of what you've come up with, and sharing and testing the thinking before you even go into application, because that early stage feedback can be quite useful. And the other is conducting experiments. How can you test your prototypal thinking, your prototypal framework, etc., in a way that will be generative? We're not looking at destructive testing in terms of our experiments. We're looking at generative testing. What questions or assumptions do we need to ask or test that will enable us to grow our thinking over time? So in terms of experimentation, many different ways that we can explore from an experimentation perspective, but essentially what we're turning ourselves into are feedback engines. The idea being that we put ourselves in the middle of a process, a series of feedback loops that are generating and growing our ideas over time. From my experience working with corporate clients, the more physical or tangible we can make our thinking, the more visual we can make our thinking, the better it is for everybody. If we can provide opportunities for people to prototype our thinking in situ, that's great. Storyboarding is another great tool to use in terms of experimentation, regardless of whether or not you're building a product or a service or you're exploring a research opportunity. One case in example, I'm sure everybody, or at least many of you, know what this is. It's a pizza cutter. Now, I have a pizza cutter that looks very similar to this. Based on the application of design thinking, this particular pizza cutter was transformed into a pizza cutter that looks nothing like it. This company, Xylus, actually worked with IDEO to transform its kitchen tool line. And the thinking that went into this was based on the observation in situ of a grandmother and a grandchild who were baking and making in the grandmother's kitchen. It was the grandchild's first time at baking, and what they saw was that the grandmother had a significant difficulty holding onto the kitchen tools because of the arthritis in her hands. At the other end of the spectrum, remember I talked about looking at extremes in terms of stakeholder behavior. At the other end of the spectrum was the grandchild, who was about 6 or 7. This was her first time in the kitchen. What they recognized is that she had a challenge manipulating the kitchen tools also, but for a very different reason. Her upper body strength and her strength of her hands was actually far less because she was just at a developmental stage, which meant that she didn't have the grip strength that some of the materials that were being baked are required to be used. The end result was, based on IDEO and Xylus's work together, was this particular pizza cutter. The blade is removable for easy cleaning. The red metal that you see surrounding the blade enables a two-handed grip and enables you to put the force of body weight over the top of the pizza cutter. The hole that you see in the blade enables you to hang up the blade for drying so that it doesn't need to lie flat, which was one of the other challenges. And it also has a guard that swings out. You can see in the top end of the red cover, there's a little piece that you can see there, which actually slides out and around and enables you to slide that over the pizza cutter's blade, so you don't, when you're reaching into the tool drawer, you don't cut yourself horribly on the blade edge. Now, this is one presentation of a particular product that underwent a transformation as a result of applied design thinking. My fondest hope is that we can see similar transformations in terms of our approaches to collaboration in designing research for ourselves and intended audiences and research subjects. The other thing that we do in experimentation is actually give ourselves permission to look at the world in unique and different ways. This is a street artist who works around the world creating I guess, installations that cause you, if you take the time to look at them, to think about the environment in completely different and profound ways. This is another one of his images. And what he does is he uses materials and experiments with those materials as a way of sending messages about the quality of the environment that we're in. The materials he uses are low-grade materials. You see newspaper in one case. In this particular case, it's just sellotape wrapped around balloon molds to achieve the effect of these puppies playing in this trash heap. But the idea being that the low-fidelity experiments are often the best. So when you're thinking about what it takes to extend your research's impact or extend the quality of your research topic, don't think that you have to have a completely funded, fully vetted approach. There is no way that you there are many ways that you can start small in terms of your experimentation to advance your thinking and advance your ideas. Last but by no means least is when we move through these 5 phases, we want to create something that we can use and repurpose and will help us think of new challenges. So we're looking at ways of codifying our learnings. The practices of researching and reporting on the research and presenting that research are essentially baked into the concept of evolution. But what we're also seeking to do is create an opportunity in this particular framework, this Design Thinking for Scholars framework, is to not only land in an area where we have codified learnings, codified research. But what we want to do is help us transfer that research into the hands of others, either for continuing research or to transfer to practitioners so that it can have a significant and meaningful impact on the stakeholders on the ground. So in terms of the evolution of our thinking, it's a matter of distilling down our research and being prepared to communicate it face-to-face in written form and other forms. And it's all about planting the seed of the next idea. It's what's the next challenge that we're going to pursue, because when we work through the design thinking approach, we get multiple attempts to make our research better because of the multiple times that we can ideate and experiment through this approach, which I think makes it quite valuable as an additional model for researchers and for scholars. The other thing it does is it also presents us with other opportunities, other research targets, and that's the thing that I think we wanted to stress towards the end of this particular model, is that it's not an endpoint, it's basically an ongoing cycle of development in terms of design thinking and design thinking practice. It also helps you point the way, not only for your own research, where you might go next, but it also helps point the way for others so that they can understand how they can bridge from and build on the work that you've done in collaboration with your peers. So that is my presentation of the Design Thinking for Scholars model. I'll open it up for questions now. I do recognize that we've got quite a number of people in the mix here in terms of questions. I've got, let me just pull up the attendee list. Are there any questions? There's a question. Any questions? In terms of questions, if you would like to put up your hand, I can take you off mute if you would like to ask your question. I recognize that there are some questions that are in the questions area. George, what about beginning by immersion in a client's ineffable? Why? So, George, I'm not too sure that I'm understanding your question. If my response doesn't make sense, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll take you off mute and we can clarify. The immersive approach that we look for from a design thinking best practice perspective would likely not be done in the room on the day as part of a PDW, nor would it be done through a series of webinars and other access to materials. What we're trying to do is create enough of a rich context to be able to do some meaningful work in the room on the day. We recognize that this is not how you would practice design thinking, but what we're trying to do is create an opportunity for people to take design thinking for scholars out for a drive, and we want it to be meaningful because we would like the outcomes to be as useful as possible. So we're not interested in the process in and of itself. What we're interested in is the utility of the process to scholars and academics in the field. Okay. Info on when and where the AOM sessions on this topic will take place. The PDW, Naga, I'm going to unmute you and I'm going to ask you to address this particular question. We've got a question from Ellen Taverner or Taverner. Please excuse me, Ellen, for mispronouncing your name. I know I've done that probably badly twice. Naga, you're off mute. The question is, can you give us info on where, when the AOM sessions on this topic will take place in Orlando?
The PDW is on Friday from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. In Walt Disney World Dolphin Resort in Salon A1. But it's also, there is a session preceding that on Thursday. The conference actually begins for us on Thursday at 3 p.m. in the same room. So if you go to nls.aom.org, you will see all the information right there. I can also send it out here, and then Drew can post it for everybody's benefit.
So it's nls.aom.org, Naga?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. I've just sent that out, so you should be able to see that in the questions response. Great. Darlene, yes, Darlene, if you can email me, and I'll let me just put up the email now on screen. By the way, thank you for your participation. Here's my email address. If you have an interest in receiving a copy of the handbook in soft copy, I can provide you with the with the copy. What I'll do is probably set it up so you'll need to actually access a link that I'll create on Dropbox, because I think given the size of the document, it will not make your email systems very happy wherever you email from. So I will do my level best to make sure that I share that with you. I think other question I'm looking for. Okay, so Naga was sending the information out in terms of the dolphin. I've sent that out to all of you. I believe we've got some panelists online. Naga was telling me that Terry is one of our panelists. He is online. Another panelist, Naga, is there?
Tom Breyer is online.
Oh, Tom Breyer. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for being online. And from last year, we had Sue Todd, who was in the room with us last year. So Sue's on the line today as well. So welcome, Sue. Good to see you here. What other information do you have in terms of information? What other questions do you have in terms of the session? All right, I'm looking for a hand. DT Ogilvy, you are off mute. Ask your question.
Yes. Can we have access to the recordings for the last time and this time?
Yes, Naga is going to have the recordings for both webinars up on the nls.aom.org website. We had some challenges with the last session in terms of needing to edit out about 3 minutes of nothing happening at the beginning of the last webinar. The other point I will make about the last webinar is that there was a slide presentation at the beginning of the webinar, but there was a very robust conversation at the end with our two presenters, Barbara and John, on the webinar a couple of weeks ago. The screen is dark, but the audio is there, and the audio is pretty good.
Okay.
So yes, they will be made available.
Can we have access to the slides as well?
The slide deck is actually on Prezi. What I can do is I can make it a public slide deck on Prezi, and I can make sure that Naga has a direct link to that he can put on the NLS website.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome so much. What other questions do you have? All right, just doing a scan. Recordings. Okay, the first session, Naga is telling me, DT, the first session is already up on the nls.aom site.
Great.
So you should be able to see that today. Sue is asking a question. When we are dealing with research on social sciences primarily, are there more challenges to address the context, taking into account something like sensitive dependence on initial conditions? This is something that came up on our last webinar, Sue, and I think the answer to your question is yes. There are more challenges to address the given context. One of the reasons why Ron and his student team have been doing the research that they've been doing is to give us additional data on the context of homelessness in the particular community that we are going to in terms of Orlando, the broader Orlando issue of homelessness. And I think that's something that we recognized from last year, and we wanted to address that this year. It's not enough to have some information about the topic. What we're looking for is a degree of specificity to a particular context at hand. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, and one of our hopes is that we will close that gap, knowing that we cannot eliminate that gap in terms of our understanding of the context on the day. Looks like we have another question. 1 second, I'll scroll up. DT, you have a question?
No.
No? Okay.
I thought I was on mute. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm putting your hand is still up. I'm going to put your hand down. So
Okay, thank you.
Solicit other questions. Are there any other questions that you would like to ask and answer? I don't want to belabor the point or keep you online any longer than you need to. I'll leave the screen up if you've got if you need a way to contact me. Please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any additional questions. I'll be sure and answer them as quickly as I possibly can. But as expected, we've finished well under the hour. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this was of some value to you, and I hope that we get to see you in Orlando. I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible. I'll be the one in the front of the room waving my arms around on the day of the PDW, facilitating and trying to breathe some life into our design thinking for scholars approach. So thank you so much for your participation and your attention, and have a great day.